Hit it like again, finally, with Dr. Jim. And the hair's gone.
I know. I saw that on Facebook yesterday. What moved you?
We knew this would have to happen eventually. And honestly, it was a number of considerations. I've always gone, years short hair, years long hair. It's just this sort of alternating pattern. But honestly, Jim, rolling Jiu Jitsu was the final thing. I was rolling the other night. Gentle listeners, Pat Flynn is finally getting back to rolling. And the hair was just a damn nuisance. And I'm like, and so are the glasses too. So I'm like, you know what? I'm just going to at least eliminate one of those.
So you kept your glasses on?
I did, but they're going to come off next. I mean, we were just doing, we didn't even spar. We were just doing very basic drills.
Sure. How blind are you?
Pretty blind. I've got quite bad astigmatism. So it's, it's
pretty
distance.
blind. Yeah.
It's distance. It's the issue. So I probably wouldn't be completely helpless without my glasses doing jujitsu, but I think I'd still be disadvantaged. Yeah. Mm-hmm. But sorry, you're phasing. Okay, you were lagging a bit, but you're back.
That's an interesting question. Yeah. You got me now?
Yeah, you're back.
Can you hear me now?
I think. Yeah, you're kind of like chopping in and out. It'll stabilize.
A sound thing too.
Gentle listeners, thanks for tuning in. We will be doing some Q&A here. But sorry, Jim. Now there's like a weird time lag between me and you, so I'll try and like leave a little extra space between my comments here, and hopefully it'll sync back up.
I was listening to Joe Rogan yesterday. He had Dr. Rhonda Patrick on, who is one of my favorite regulars on the Joe Rogan Experience, and They were talking about just like good podcasting etiquette, right? So I think I picked up some tips right there.
Please, well, share before we dive in here.
One of the big things, and I know I do this in the sense I do it wrong, is you can't forget you're not really having a normal conversation, because in a normal conversation, we spend a lot of time speaking simultaneously, and it just doesn't work in a podcast format. It just comes off like talking over each other. And they made the point how you have to get really used to taking turns speaking in a podcast format. And they said the headphones help because you actually hear yourself in some ways through the headphone. So that was the number one tip they had. It was pretty cool.
Nice. All right, so this is informal. Jim's like back to teaching again, so we're just trying to squeeze in at least one stream this week, and we're going to do some questions. Jim, I want to do a little book share before. Can we do that? But
also, let's not let school get too much in the way of our education. So I remain committed to regular Pat Flynn show. Right.
Yes. Well, of course. Right. And what I would like to do at some point is actually get a little bit more of a set schedule, because I've had people asking, when do you and Jim go live? And I tell them it's just whenever we feel like it.
Because and don't spoil it, people, please.
So I go back and forth. Like, it'd be kind of cool to have a set time, but at the same time, I just kind of like being impromptu as well. So I guess we'll see.
The Friday afternoon thing is pretty cool.
Yeah, right. Philosophy Friday. It fits the theme well. So, Jim, I put up a thing on my Substack. Let me mention my Substack again real quick, because we're cooking over there. I put up a post of some of what I thought are the best theist and atheist dialogue books. Do you read a lot of dialogue books or debate books?
Not a ton. I have, right, but not a ton.
And the reason I put this up is, there's a lot of people who might not be they're interested in any number of questions, right? And it might be metaphysics, or it might be nutrition or something like that. And I think one of a very useful thing to do is to remove yourself from popular level debates. Try and find the best relevant experts on a particular matter. And see and read their exchanges. Now, you may or may not be able to completely evaluate it yourself, but I'm a big fan of just trying to go to the end of the rainbow on things. Like, what do the best, most qualified experts who disagree have to say on these subjects, right? So just let's get your thoughts on that. Then I'll share this list, and I'll put the link to my Substack in the chat as well.
I agree 100%. I don't like, don't like strong word. we often get questions like, what should I read? And usually what should I read is, what 100-page large print thing can I sit down with in a single afternoon and like say I've covered this debate, or I've covered philosophy, something like that. And I don't think that's a good way to, live a life in pursuit of wisdom, right? So I like this idea of, and like the book that I saw you link there, it's the Haldane JGC Smart.
That's my top one. I'll go through the books here in a minute, but you finish your thought.
But that's a great example. You have two super smart guys, super smart guys, going at it. And so you're learning the content of the material you're learning, but you're also learning how to do this, like how to have a debate, like how to like field objections, how to answer objections. You're learning a lot of methodological stuff just by following through it, right? Not that you'd be able to write those lessons down, but that's not how skills work. It's like you learn it by like following it and doing it. You're basically drilling your own rhetorical skill by going through it, right? So I like those kinds of books. And there's a reason why Plato wrote in dialogues, right?
Right.
Mm-hmm. And I like the idea of, I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to get like two very, very good experts on this and follow them. Right.
Yeah. So let's go through some of these here. I just have 5 real quick that I want to recommend on the Substack, because I had people ask about this, and I think it is really important that, no matter what in life, you set your target on truth. This sounds so obvious, but I think sometimes people don't set their target on truth. They set it on confirming what I already believe, or something else, right? Or personality. And it's just an obvious thing that if you set your target on something, you're going to be more likely to hit it. Doesn't mean it's guaranteed, but if you set your target intentionally on something, you're going to be more likely to hit it. So I think part of what it means to set your target on truth means to try and find the best, most relevant people who disagree. So the first one is, I think this is my favorite exchange book, Atheism and Theism. Jack Smart and John Haldane are just both world class, right? I would say also both of them philosophical generalists, right? They have incredible depth, but they also have just enormous breadth. And this is just an excellent book. I can't recommend it highly enough. I'm not going to even spoil it. I'm just going to get these out there real quick.
Yeah, I like it.
A recent one that I put in my list, I haven't finished all of it yet, but I've been enjoying it so far. Not as much, is this one. It's a new one with Michael Ruse and Brian Davis.
Yeah, I want to get that one.
Yeah, I feel, I like Ruse. I like Michael Ruse a lot. So he's actually more of an agnostic. And the thing about Ruse is that first off, he hates the new atheists, which is funny. He almost fights with the new atheists more than theists do, even though, right? And he's a serious philosopher of science. He's a really great writer. So he's very intelligent, very charming. And this book is good because I think Davis he's a powerhouse Thomist, right? He's engaging substantively on the things that Ruse is bringing up, but he's also somewhat taking Ruse to task on being shallow, not just on a Thomistic perspective, which Ruse eventually admits that he is, but also being shallow in sort of misunderstanding a number of the objections he's bringing up. So I have to say I'm a little disappointed so far with Ruse's performance in this book. Mm-hmm.
I'm a Brian Davies home dog, so I don't mind watching him wail on Ruse. So I'm gonna get that book.
He doesn't wail as hard as you can. There's a number of things where I'm like, Davis should have gone a lot harder here, but he didn't. But this is cool because Davis is really good at kind of like picking the things that he thinks would be most valuable to like settle, because you can't do everything even in an exchange book, right? Let me give one more with Ruse that I think somebody really does wail. And that's this one. This is these books are pretty good most of the time.
I have that one.
Yeah, this one, I like this one a lot. This one's Michael Ruse is in it again, and Bruce Gordon, Christianity and Science. Yeah. Gordon goes to town in this. I had not read much of Gordon before this.
There's another one, it's just like Atheism and Theism, a dialogue with I can't remember who the other one with Ruse that I've read, and it's okay. Yeah.
So I like Ruse a lot. I do. He's a great thinker, but Bruce Gordon really impressed me in this. He kind of veers off into idealist territory at one point. So we might have like deeper metaphysical disagreements eventually, but this is a really good book, especially if you're just interested in the whole, not just atheism and theism, but religion and science question. This
The
is a
thing
really
with
good one.
Roos on this stuff is, okay, so Roos is a philosopher of biology, right? And that's really what he does, and that's what he wants to do, right?
Mhm.
And then you like put him in the ring with Davies on, philosophy of God. Well, that's like a black belt versus a blue belt, right?
I think that's the issue. That's why
in all these books, yeah.
that's why
I
this
love
is
that he
this
wants
is
to
that's
do
why
it.
this is a better book, right?
Yeah.
So
Those
the
are two black
reason,
belts.
and I'm not. I want to be clear. Like Roos is highly intelligent, but he isn't. The part of the problem is I don't think he's the most relevant expert because he's not a philosopher of religion, right?
Right.
So you do kind of have this asymmetry, and I think I don't think he's the best representative.
But here's an upside on that though. Is that means that the debate goes on at a level that's probably more accessible, right? So if you put down like Michael Tooley and Brian Davis, right, or someone, or even
let me recommend the other one, which is it's a new one. It's, if I can get the screen back up here, it is highly recommend it. Is God the Best Explanation of Things by Rasmussen and Leon? That one is that one is our two
experts,
relevant experts.
Yeah, but that's going to go technical in a hurry. I bet.
It gets to be it's not. I think it's definitely for people who have a background in philosophy, whereas this book anybody could pick up and read for the most part, right?
So there was one with Tooley and Planiga, right, on Problem of Evil stuff.
If there is, I haven't read that one.
I think there was. I think I have. I remember. I think that was it. I've read it, and it was. I loved it. It was awesome, but it got heavy Bayes theorem stuff in a hurry. So I found it useless in the classroom.
Yeah, Rasmussen will do that a fair amount because because everybody loves Bayes, like everybody loves Raymond these days, right? So
I will admit to the same.
Right. Yeah.
You saw my most recent paper. It's all over here.
Right. And there's one more in my little list here, since I had 5, and then people can go to Substack to get the last one. And it's 3 views on Christianity and I'm sorry, 4 views on Christianity and philosophy. And I will just tell the gentle listeners, there it is on my Substack. You can just read the exchanges between Tim McGrew and Graham Oppy in that. You can skip.
Who are the other two?
I forget at this point, because I found the most useful and interesting exchanges between McGrew and Oppy. Those were the most substantive by far.
Yeah.
So I would say that. So anyways, just wanted to get those recommendations out. Jim, what are you reading? Any good books that
what am I reading? I'm reading a very interesting book called Beginning with Heidegger, written by a guy named Millerman. He's a very interesting figure, and it's looking at like political philosophy in Rorty, Derrida, Strauss, and a guy named Duggan, and looking at like they're all different receptions of Heidegger. So that's been kind of making me rethink some things in an interesting way. Right now, my teaching, I reread Big Alpha and Little Alpha of Metaphysics this week for my metaphysics class, and I reread Agamemnon by Aeschylus from my ethics class, and so it's pretty fun rubbing those two together this week. So
right. Awesome. So by the way, why don't we just dive into the first question? It might be relevant, Jim. Rob says, for both of you guys, in your opinion, what is Aristotle's weak point in his metaphysics? That's a substantial work. So it's
I mean, there's tons of weak points, right? I mean, we got planetary motion wrong there, right?
Yeah. So like just general physical theory, we're going to have some issues.
Well, yeah. I mean, and also, this is people get mad at this, but Aristotle claims that he can demonstrate that stuff, or it's demonstrable, and it's wrapped up in his first cause arguments and all that stuff, right? So there's a real problem of like, how much can we excise from the system and still have it remain intact? And I think that's a really fascinating, interesting question, right?
Right.
And we kind of just don't worry about it. I don't worry about it.
Yeah, I think, because that's right. Like if people ask me, do I think Aristotle's argument works? I'd say no.
You need circular motion going on.
Right. It doesn't. And that's why I think somebody like Phaser gives an Aristotelian proof that he says is in the spirit of of Aristotle, right? He's like, if Aristotle if he were still alive today, this is probably how he would recast it, right?
Yeah. And I think another important thing is, this is okay in my metaphysics class. The way I teach metaphysics is always like the first half of the class we read Aristotle's Metaphysics, and then the second half of the class we read some modern classic of metaphysics. So for this time we're going to read Hegel's Encyclopedia Logic. Okay, but always the way I teach the metaphysics for Aristotle is, the central question is the question of book Zeta, right? Which is, what is substance? And it looks like, on the one hand, you can't say it's the form of the thing, because the form on Aristotle's view is not a this, right? Okay. But on the other hand, it's like you have to say it's the form, because nothing else is what it is. It's nothing else is definable, right? And so Aristotle sees himself, he's got himself locked into what's maybe an aporia there. Mm-hmm. Earlier on, he said, Plato was wrong on all these counts for making the substance separable. And then by the time you get to Zeta, he's like, dang, man, it looks like the form's separable, but then we've lost the individual. And so there's a real question to be asked about whether or not the metaphysics, the book comes to naught, right? In Zeta there, does he solve it or not? I mean, I personally think he does. Okay. Mm-hmm. I think he does. I think there's a read we can get on that. That's very complicated, but can be done where it works. Okay. But that's a matter of, now 2,000 years of controversy. Right. And so I think that's a definite question. Right. And I never put, Aristotle's Metaphysics or any text really like out there. Here it is. Boom. This
solves all of it. No. Yeah. Right. Yeah. No, I say like these like broad strokes, good ideas. Right. Yeah. Like a lot of right stuff in the broad strokes, trending in the right direction. Like Metaphysics, book 12, part 9. Right. Yeah. When he analyzes God as a thought thinking itself is a brilliant insight, right? Which I think is correct. I mean, and eventually it gets developed till you get to somebody like Lonergan, who really, I think, gives really cashes it out, right? In a way that Aristotle didn't. But Aristotle was like, no, there can't be any distance or difference between God's act and object of understanding, right? Mm-hmm. And he's given this deep analysis of why. And some of the surrounding details we may quibble or disagree with, but I think that is an insight that is that's correct, right? Maybe we need to support it in different ways. So I think there's a number of stuff like that, not just in metaphysics, but Aristotle's work everywhere. Like there's a point that he's making that I think is right, even if I would disagree with how he got there, or say maybe the way he got there doesn't work. But hey, there's another way, right?
Yeah. Mm-hmm. And another thing too is, I mean, in book 1 of the Metaphysics, you're basically being told that the best type of life is indeed the life of the contemplative philosopher, right? And that's affirmed in book 10 of the Ethics, right? And those two texts can't be separated from each other. And there's question that maybe book 10 of the Ethics was actually originally part of the Metaphysics and all this, right? Because it doesn't really fit too neatly in the story in the Ethics. But anyway, and so, I mean, there's a real question, is that actually correct? Right? I mean, is indeed the contemplative life the best life, right? And in the sense of being the Aristotelian scientist, right? And Aristotle's pretty open. That's not a life that's really open to a lot of human beings and all that. I mean, so I think there's some serious value theory questions, especially a Christian's got to ask there. Right.
Oh, I completely, I completely agree. I think that's a really important. It seems like the good life for Aristotle would be pretty restricted, right?
Right? Yeah, by design,
extremely restricted, and certainly that seems intuitively off, right? Yeah. Now there's reasons to think that the good life is bound up in something intellectual, definitely, right? Because that seems, highest of those things that are within us and most perfect, right? And so when we lead a truly good life, it should involve some type of perfection of our intellectual capacities, right? But we also just intuitively want to say what about the kind of dumb guy, right, who jumps on a grenade for a friend, right?
No immortality for you, friend.
Right.
Right.
No, it seems like like that dude still seemed to live a good life, or at least did a really good thing, right?
Yeah, and it's interesting. In book 10 of the Ethics, Aristotle basically says there's 3 candidate good lives because they're all serious, right? It's the life of war, right? The life of politics, and the philosopher, right? And he just says of the 3, the best one is the philosopher, right? But keep in mind, like for Aristotle, like that's not something that anyone's really up to till they're 50, right? And so, I mean, so I think yeah, there's also, I mean, and I think, is there much to question in the metaphysics? Yes. I mean, this is an expression of a Bronze Age view of reality, okay, that many of us, for good reasons, there are elements of that we would find very distasteful, right? And there's elements of that I think we would find very affirmative, right? And so, yeah, we should have a critical relationship even to that text. But I'll say this, that's one of the absolute canonical texts of my life. Yeah,
and you can agree with Aristotle on a general virtue ethics and natural law, and disagree with some of the conclusions he reached himself on particular points of value. And I think you should actually. Number of things.
Yeah, magnanimity is an interesting thing for Aristotle.
Right, Plato too, right? So I've been actually spending a lot more time with Plato than Aristotle again recently.
Yeah, the Republic is a more complicated book than you may have remembered from your freshman year.
We just got to communal property in the Republic again.
Oh yeah, wow.
we can talk about that maybe as we go along. But let's keep fielding some questions here.
Man,
that was a great question, by the way.
The listeners are hitting the questions here.
Yeah. Drop whatever you have in, folks. Fitness, philosophy, anything you want. We'll just keep jumping back and forth. Jim, take Goris and Gator's next 2 questions because they're both on your programs. I have been having too much of the sparkly beverage. I'm going to take a bathroom break.
Forest, and then what's Gator's question? Where's that in there?
It is to piggyback.
Okay, cool.
You got it?
Yeah. Okay, so Forrest wanted to know what size kettlebell for the program. If you get into the program, I have options for whatever kettlebells you have available. Okay, so the absolute Cadillac ideal would be that you have access to kettlebells of several different weights that you can medley your way through. If you only have one kettlebell, I give you a strategy to deal with that in the Q&A for the program. Okay, if the kettlebell's a little heavy or a little light, I give you a strategy to deal with that in the program. So I think the program should work whatever equipment you have available, as long as you have a pull-up bar, you have a kettlebell of almost any weight, right? Probably area in the size a little heavier than lighter, and you have some place you can do some sprints, or you have some piece of machinery on which you can do sprints, right? So it should be pretty equipment neutral. Okay. If you were thinking of just buying a kettlebell to do the program, you're just going to get your first kettlebell to do the program, thank you, right? I would you want a program that you could do, you want a kettlebell that you could do a weighted pull-up with, which would still represent a decent working set for singles on your Turkish get-up. Okay. If you have that, you have all you need to do the program. Okay. Okay. What was the other question? What was Gators?
Yeah. Let me pull it up real quick.
I appreciate that.
Are you not able to see the questions, Jim?
I can't. I just have to scroll through to find it.
Okay. Yeah. Here's Gators. He says, to piggyback on the other question, can you discuss the idea of your get-up pull-up program and where it fits with Jiu Jitsu?
Yeah. Okay. So the get up pull-up program, the idea is a one-stop shop for strength and conditioning for those of us who are either training for something else along with it, or just want to be available for other things in addition to our training. Okay. So highly effective non-beat down program. Okay. And I do this, I program the get up, I program the weighted pull up, and I program the sprints in a way that you should be able to do one of these workouts and be able to later that same day do something like jujitsu, or just chase your kids around the park, or go for a run because you're training for a 5K or something like that. The program is designed to be low impact, like high effect, so that you're available for what you really actually care about, right? Whether it's a martial art, whether it's a sport, or whether it's just being an active human being, right? And so what I do is I play with so for instance, with the Turkish get up, there's kind of like a a daily max that you'll do on that in an important sense that you're not really maxing, just finding your best single for the day. Same thing with the pull-ups. And then I play around with different tempos of doing get-ups for sort of a hypertrophy day. And then there's 1 day a week of sprints. So I thanks for the interest in the program and have at it.
Where can people get it?
They can get it at jdmadden.com/fitness. Yes.
Go and help yourselves.
Go for it. Yeah, definitely.
Yeah,
definitely. And then that'll send you to a link at Gumroad to grab it.
Sweet. Next question comes from Enrique. He says, good night from Spain. Nighty night, sweet prince. He says, my question, do you think there are things that are universally good or bad? I've been surprised by the answers of everyone I know. Thank you. So, question on morality. Jim, is it always and everywhere wrong to murder and mutilate an innocent child? Yes, start there.
Yes, it is always and everywhere wrong to intentionally murder and mutilate an innocent child. Yes.
Right. So we would be committed to some things, at least some things are always and everywhere wrong, if that's what we mean by universally. Yeah.
And I will even say, because, I'm such a kind of a virtue ethics guy, what I mean by that is it would never be good for you to have done that.
Right. Right.
It would never be to your benefit to be such that you did that.
I think we should maybe build on that a little bit, because from a virtue ethics standpoint and natural law, so much of morality, what determines whether something is good or bad determines whether it perfects us as the sort of things that we are. Right. So given the sort of things that we are, rational, social, dependent animals, right? It is never, as a matter of objective fact, going to be good for you to be a cruel and vicious person to small innocent children, right? So you will always be steering yourself away to your own destruction at the end of the day, is what we're saying, by doing something like that. And certain actions can steer you more or less, right? Now with philosophy, I think it's hard to like put a certain degree on that. If you bring in theology and you have a church, drawing distinctions between venial and mortal sin helps more, right? But just in the realm of philosophy, even within the realm of philosophy, we can definitely tell that some things are far worse than others, though, right?
Yeah, agreed. Yeah,
I just to help Enrique, because it sounds like he's just kind of like investigating this question. I think it's worth jamming on. I think I can speak for both of us that we come from a broadly, I guess, natural law and virtue ethic perspective on this, right? That there are such things as essences, right? There's a such thing as a human essence of a what it isness to what we are, right? And that there are certain ways of life that are going to be conducive to perfecting us as the kind of things that we are, and certain ways of life that are going to cause us to fail, right? As the sort of things that we are, to have either an objectively good overall existence, or at least better, or an objectively worse, or maybe even outright bad overall existence, right? So just in the same sense, if you think that you can have something like a better or worse triangle, depending on how well you draw the sides, right? Humans are obviously more complex, but it's the same type of idea, right? And morality, I think it's really important to understand that morality only enters, like, we can make judgments about certain things being good or bad. Like, this is a good tree because it has, sunk its roots deep, and it has the nutrients that it needs, and, a strong, sturdy trunk, and all the things that we know make a good tree, right? Morality only enters the scene when rationality comes online. Right. And we can select between particular finite means of how we're going to pursue our ends. Right. So morality is ultimately a rational enterprise. You just don't have morality online until rationality itself is on the scene. You can still make, certain judgments, good and bad, but right and wrong, certainly I would say you're not going to make sense of that unless you have rational agency. Right.
Mm-hmm. So 1 second here. So let me, let's suppose, even if you're like a utilitarian, and you would say there are scenarios where the torture and murder of an innocent child, I guess, as if there's non-innocent children, right? But the torture and murder of an innocent child was something you had to do to sort of like save a bunch of other people. Okay, so you admit, I'm not saying this is the case, but your view was that like someone who did that in that case would be justified in doing what they were doing. They hadn't done anything morally wrong or something like that. Okay. Let's just, for the sake of argument, let me grant that. Okay. But then would it make sense, right, for the person who had done the torture and murder to not be horrified by what they had done? Would it make sense for the person who'd done the torture and the murder not to wish it had not been the case? Would it make sense for that person not to, feel as if they had been wrecked by having done that, right? And I think you have to say no, right? Like even if you said there was some kind of like utilitarian justification for doing it, you would still say someone who was not horrified by doing that was some kind of monster, right? Mm-hmm. So I think you have to then say, whatever like meta ethical theory you want to bring to this to like try to say, what we should or shouldn't do. When you ask me, are there universally good or bads, right? Well, what I mean by that is, just using the bad side of it, are there things such that no matter what, if you've done this, you have brought yourself a kind of harm, right? Yes, and that's it. Even if you admit greater good came from it, even if you think greater good is enough to justify it, would you have been harmed by doing that? Yes, you would have, right? And if someone can't recognize that as harming to themselves, that's just the classical definition of vice, right? That's what it is to be a vicious person, right? Do you see my point? Okay.
Oh yeah.
I think we could then go on and say, well, if you cannot deny that the agent is harmed by doing this, then it's very hard to think that it's ever justifiable and all that. But I don't think, just even leaving aside that debate, is there something universally wrong? Yeah. What is it? Something that you would have to admit someone who was forced to do it would be harmed by their very doing it. Right. Good
question. Meow says, Pat and Jim, do you think Ryan Mullins and Schmid have defended existential inertia better than previous proponents? You read any of the stuff on that, Jim?
I have not. Yeah,
so I have. They've certainly at more length, but existential inertia is going to trace back at least to. I mean, some people have pointed to even sources before this, but I'm going to say at least to in the contemporary conversation, Mortimer Adler in his book How to Think About God. And a funny thing about existential inertia is that book, How to Think About God, was one of the first books I read on natural theology. Yeah. And I was impressed by the objection at the time because I wasn't that deep into Thomistic metaphysics, right?
Yeah.
Then I start really trying to get my metaphysics straight, and then I come back around and say existential inertia is it's just not even tenable, right? There's just no room in the metaphysical scheme for existential inertia. Right. So I think it's important. So I actually came back around and just decided that Adler was just completely wrong on this point. He misunderstood the Thomistic proofs, and really he just didn't have a deep enough understanding of the underlying metaphysics of essence and essay and all that, right? Once you have
an example of something we talked about in our last conversation about like learning to like be critical to your very sources that brought you in. But yeah.
Right. So then the question is, is existential inertia, is it going to fly in relation to, say, a deante argument? No. And Gavin and I have talked about that many times. And Gavin actually has a recent paper out and over at Vetera, specifically dealing with that. Is it going to be a useful objection to other arguments for God's existence or something like that? Well, that's where I think it would be worth looking at Ed Fazer's recent exchange, particularly in the latest issue of Religious Studies. He had a good sparring there with Graham Oppy. Okay. So, and I think Fazer handled the objections quite handily as well. Cool. So, cool. Yep. And I've got a lot of previous conversations with Gavin on that as well. If anybody wants to dive deeper, I do not remember the name or titles off the top of my head. So that happy hunting. Back to fitness. Elliott says, "Would love to hear you both talk about auto-regulation. I love the idea of training intuitively, but sometimes I want to train my hardest when I feel my worst, and it doesn't end well." So let me just real quick before I let Jim chime in say we did a whole conversation on this with Jeff Newport a couple months ago. So if you have not listened to that one, please just check that one out, because that's the whole theme of that one.
Directly what I'll say to Elliott here is discipline cuts in both directions. In the same way that you have to discipline yourself to do something when you want to do nothing, right? You have to discipline yourself to do less when you want to do more, right? In many cases. And I have the same problem, Elliott. I will tend to ignore what my body's telling me and then just push through and do more. I'll admit, like 9 out of 10 times it ends up being fabulous, right? But it doesn't have to, so auto-regulation, I think, is the way to go in a lot of ways, because there's nothing in our evolution that tells us that our hormones and stuff work on nice, neat 7-day cycles, right? And that human bodies recover in nice, neat, 48-hour periods and stuff like that. And there's going to be more variability, especially as you get older. So I think you have to get to the point where you are disciplined enough, you know yourself enough that you can auto-regulate through most of your programming, okay? But it does take a special kind of discipline. And I think for a lot of us, it's the discipline of knowing when to, not just knowing when to back off, but backing off when you know it's the time to back off, right? Mm-hmm. So I agree with you. Yeah, you probably have a problem with doing more than you should. Welcome to all of us, right? But no, that's one more virtue to develop, right? And it takes a kind of humility, right?
It does. And patience. Patience.
And so I'll give you an example is the world has conspired that I cannot train jiu-jitsu tonight. And I'm it's Friday night, man, and I can't train. And so yesterday I went out, I did a long jog with a bunch of burpees built into it. I had a real run, a kind of like real hard workout, beat down kind of thing. And this morning, my normal workout was just a kind of an easy strength thing. Okay. But then since I knew I wasn't going to train jiu-jitsu tonight, my immediate move was like, oh, I should just like pound myself now. Right. Rather than, I don't know, maybe like Providence has spoken and Jim can have an easy day. God forbid. Right. And so I had to really discipline myself not to, like, this afternoon, like go out and have like a 3-hour bike ride in the heat. Right.
Right.
Because it's a chance to get ahead now. It's actually, I'm going to get ahead. Right. Yeah.
Right. And I think it's important when this is related to virtue is people can sometimes, because I've done this, I know there's some experience, right? Confuse being obsessive compulsive with being disciplined.
Yeah.
Right. Not the same thing, right? Like if you're OCD about what you eat, right, that you can never enjoy like the slice of birthday cake on your kid's birthday because you're so paranoid about getting fat. That's not self-discipline. The discipline thing would be to have the frickin' cake, right? Yeah. Or something like that, right?
Yeah. I mean, I was working with a client the other day, and he was all worried about, like, whether he could keep carrots in the diet, and I was like, look, dude, it didn't all go wrong with the carrots, right? Like,
it wasn't the carrots.
It wasn't the carrots, dude. Trust me. Yeah. And if you just completely freaked out, like you indulged, like gluttony that would make Caligula blush on like Christmas, Easter, and your kid's birthday, you would not be fat. Those are the only days you did it, right?
Right. Now, as Aristotle taught us, right, is like sometimes people are, more likely to be closer to either the excess or the deficiency, depending on what's in consideration. No, certainly in America today, I think people are more likely to be on the side of gluttony, right? Exactly. than its opposite. So just be aware of that, right? But specifically, once you get into the fitness industry, you do start to see the opposite, right? Where people, like, the more disciplined thing would be, no, it's your kid's birthday, like have the cake, right?
Yeah.
All right, let's keep going here. Another fitness one. Kirill says, I have many questions, but here's one I was thinking about. Should I practice Turkish get-ups more on the weaker side when the other one is much worse? Generally, I think if you're much worse, and what do we mean by much worse? I think like anywhere between like a 10 to 15% differential in like performance between your dominant and non-dominant side is about normal. If you're much worse, no, I think just doing extra practice on your weaker side makes a heck of a lot of sense. I used to do it and still do it, but especially in Taekwondo, I had a clearly weak side, and I would just do more reps on that side because I needed it to be better. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I go back and forth on this one because let's say, I can barely do a get up with, a 24 kg on my left side, but I can do them all day on my right side. But I still match them 1-to-1 for each side, I'm actually in a sense getting more work on my left side now, right? I'm working it harder in a way, right? But I guess the thing though is maybe this is the thing too, is if you have that kind of strength imbalance, what the weak side needs is not like more limit work. It needs more sublimit work, right? So maybe you match them on your heavier kettlebell and then add some extra lighter stuff.
Right, because by doing it the same way, you might be compensating and using crappier technique with your weaker side, which might not be great overall.
No, and you're at your limit. You're at your limit over there. Yeah,
right. And the other thing I'll say is this: I haven't looked at the research at this in a while, but when I did look a while back, I wasn't entirely surprised to find this, but they did some. As if I remember my sources right now, I don't. But it was they did do some research into people. I think where they just trained one side of their body, and they found a surprising amount of carryover to the non-trained side as well.
Yeah, I've heard that one too.
That does happen, right? So like even if you just like military press right arm all the time, your left side will get stronger. Your body will make that. Now it's not a perfect carryover, of course, but it does.
Especially on the Turkish get up. Right? So I actually think, let's say I'm doing up my left arm up. The real driver, so to speak, is my right arm. Right. You know what I mean? It seems that's the more taxed side.
Yeah, it's definitely it's just so not an isolated exercise that you're not going to leave something like completely unworked in the get up, which is I think a great feature of the get up.
Yeah.
Gator has a question.
My get up program at jdmad.com.
jdmad.com/fitness. Go there now. Gator says, how does Substack subscriptions work? Is that $99 for as many accounts as I want? I don't know how most of them work, but mine's free. I know a lot of people charge for the Substack. I'm not doing it. I just wanted to have a platform that was dedicated entirely to my as a philosophical sketch pad for me. Yeah. So,
man, you have officially tempted me now,
dude. I promised myself I wasn't going to share it until I had at least 5 posts up, and now like we're cooking with gas over at the Substack. I've got here it is again real quick if I can just promote it, not because it makes me any money, it doesn't, but I've got for people who are interested, I've got that dialogue book. I actually take a look at what Michael Roos has to say on the cosmological argument in that book I mentioned. I talk about evil God and logically dependent goods. I go through extrinsic models of divine knowing. Jim, you'd like that. Talk about whether the universe is pointless because of physics or something like that. So we got a lot of stuff on there. Right?
Yeah, it kind of, I mean, it tempts me to dump the blog on my website and just have a link to the stack.
You could just do like a redirect or something like that.
Yeah,
I guess, right?
You know what I mean? Just because the Substack's kind of the thing now, people, it's a thing, yeah. Right. And I kind of like the idea. It's a sketch pad, right? These are not necessarily the opinions of the author, right?
Yeah, I like that. I should put that disclaimer on there, right? All right, let's keep going. Irish says,
there's under a nom de plume, right?
Yeah, I like that. Irish says, my entire profession is built on base, so hard to hate that.
That a boy, man.
His next comment is, I guess this links back to something we said before. I find Dr. Oppy really underwhelming. He doesn't seem to understand how to evaluate model complexity at all, but hangs his hat on it in a really preeminent way. So to that second point, I'm actually writing an article right now where I have a fair amount to say on considerations of simplicity, right? Because I essentially take the argument for atheism to be this, right? Which is, look, atheism is an ontologically leaner theory than theism, right? We at least have -1 object that you guys do, right? And atheism seems to explain everything just as well, if not better than theism. Therefore, let's just go with atheism. That would be very much in the spirit of a Graham Oppy, right? And to the first point of considerations of simplicity, I think you're right, Irish. And what I want to say is that just because something is ontologically leaner starting out, there's no straightforward way to analyze the overall complexity of that theory right at the get-go. Because look, here's a theory about world history. Bill Clinton never existed, right? Well, that theory is ontologically leaner than most other theories that historians would hold, right? It's ontologically linear. But now, in order to explain a whole bunch of data, I'm going to have to bring in all sorts of contrived ad hoc explanations that at the end of the day will lead to greater complexity in the sense that that theory will have more ways that it can go wrong. And that's the primary consideration in favor of simplicity, is that we want less ways that something can go wrong, right? And there's no straightforward way of evaluating that, I would argue, apart from actually getting into the theoretical details and getting to point number 2 and seeing, well, can you explain the stuff that you think you can explain as well as theism or better? And I'm just going to argue like no across the board. It's not even close, right? Jim, do you have anything you want to add to any of that?
Right. And if Clinton didn't exist, I mean, how are you going to explain the QAnon stuff? So, I mean,
great contribution.
It means, yeah. Sorry. No, I agree 100%. Right.
Right. Yeah. So it's just like general, just like ontological leanness, and like plus also just it's really important to understand. Irish, I'm sure you know this, but for people in general, it's like the way a theist and atheist like looks at reality as a whole often varies radically, right? And so again, it's not like we're just comparing like theory which has A and theory which has A and not B, right? Like it's just so much more complicated than that. You can't really make a substantive evaluation without going into much deeper theoretical details on these issues. So yeah, good point about model complexity. I think that is a very significant consideration that is way too often just like people think like it's a quick point score for atheism, but not at all to my mind.
I'm back.
All right, you were on another stream, but now you're that's weird. All right.
It could be that QAnon joke.
Just be a band you. Kirill says, Pat, long hair was against the law in the Soviet Union until 1971. Is that true?
I didn't know that.
I didn't know that either.
I didn't know that. Huh. I wouldn't doubt it.
Alex says, 2 questions for Pat and Dr. Jim. What are your guys' preferred reading? How do you prefer to read Plato's dialogues? Question 1. And have you guys heard of Marsilio Ficino? Obviously, I haven't because I can't pronounce his name.
Yeah.
And if you have, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, I've not heard of the latter. As far as the reading order goes, I like the standard 5 Socratic dialogues: the Euthyphro, the Apology, the Crito, the Meno, and the Phaedo first, and then have a run at the Republic. Right. And then beyond that, go for it. Just read them. Right. Definitely get the Parmenides in there at some point. Mm-hmm. Right, and the Sophist.
No disagreements there. That's is that how you typically assign it to?
Yeah, I typically in my my first philosophy, my intro class, I do the 5 Socratics, and then in ethics now I include the Republic, right, which is it's the second course for our students, right? Yeah. Mm-hmm. Right now I'm wishing I had actually started out metaphysics with them reading the Parmenides, right?
Yeah, Jim, I have to say, I have, Plato is one of these guys that, like Aristotle, you frequently return to. But for some reason, my most recent return has been so much more fruitful. I think just because of the conversations that we've had and the new perspectives you've given me on it.
Yeah. No, I mean, I realized about a year ago, like I had been dealing with a caricature of Plato for most of my career, and just began to reread this stuff. Yeah.
And man, how prophetic he is of today's society in so many ways.
Yeah. There's nothing new, right? Yeah. And a lot of it for me was in reading C.D.C. Reeves' commentaries on Aristotle and the introduction that he wrote to the new Hackett editions of Aristotle. His kind of problematizing the standard story about the relationship between Plato and Aristotle really, really hit me. And that was one of the things that brought me back to just taking a look at Plato. Yeah.
Yeah. Same with Gerson. Gerson for me.
Lloyd Gerson has got some great stuff on this.
The other thing I'll say is Aristotle and Aquinas, they don't necessarily lend themselves well to audiobooks, but Plato actually does. So when I tell people, don't complicate it with Plato, sit down, put on some Mario Kart, go to YouTube,
Yeah.
listen to Socrates' apology while you're tearing around the track, right? Like
Yep.
it's
or you're cooking dinner, or yeah.
right. Like it's so accessible.
Yeah.
So or just commuting to work, right? Just
Yeah.
if you just like took a year and you have, I guess, an average commute, you could conquer so much philosophical territory if you're just willing to listen to some.
You totally could. Yeah.
Right. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's a great point.
And I know not everybody learns well from listening. I actually I feel like I do as well listening as with the more technical stuff. I definitely need to read it, but in a general sense, I have no issue listening to material.
At the time, I feel like I don't, right? I don't retain anything from it. But man, if I don't find myself like doing verbatim quotes from Joe Rogan episodes I listened to 2 years ago, right? So I think it does actually take for me. Yeah.
Yeah. Hey, just real quick, because this one's related. The Queenmarshmaalo says, should I start reading Plato with no background reading? I suspect in philosophy. I've wanted to read Republic or Socrates' Apology. Yeah, yes, this is the introduction. Yeah. This is the invite. Yeah.
Yeah, do it. Go and just get you can find the first 5 Socratic dialogues put together. Hackett has one, Penguin has one, all the academic textbook companies have one. Just sit down and read those 5 dialogues and have fun with it.
Right, Jim. First 5.
It's funny. Like I think we're becoming like the number one advocates for the reading of Plato.
Dude, yeah, I know. It's just look. He's holding up. I have to do this for a second. He literally holds up my computer, right?
Yeah.
Because the essential Plato is just the right size for my computer to sit on when I podcast. So he's always with us.
He's always with us. Yeah.
Okay. Let's take a few more here. Good questions, as always, my friends. I think we missed this one. Kirill says, I have a bachelor's degree in culture and arts, and I don't remember any assignment on philosophy. Interested to listen to your conversation, but don't know what to ask. Hey, all questions are welcome.
Yeah, thank you, man. Thanks for listening. Yeah.
Thanks for listening, and don't ever be shy. Here is from Catholic Based, has a question for both of us. What ancient or medieval philosopher would be most impactful if they were still alive today? That is a interesting question.
Yeah, depends what you mean by impactful too, right? Yeah, I think Plato's an interesting character because he would be politically active, right? He would not. This would not be armchair. It wasn't for him in his actual life, right?
It's just so hard, even in a thought experiment, to remove any of these thinkers from the cultural context of their time.
Yeah,
you know what I do. It's like I gotta put my mind in Bill and Ted's movie.
No, this is a really good point. Like, is there a fact of the matter of what Jim Madden would be if he were not a native English speaker, born in the late 20th century, reared by a certain set of parents? You know what I mean? Like, no, there isn't like that. I think that this organism could exist some other situation, but like that personality is a product in many ways of that time. So if what you mean is like, if we pull the Bill and Ted and like we went back into the ancient world and we like kidnapped Plato and brought him back, okay, that's one thing, right? But like, how impactful would Plato be if he had come to maturity in early 21st century America or something like that? Who knows? I don't think there's a fact of the matter. It's not the same person, right?
Yeah, no, I agree with that. Sorry, I was reading a comment, but I'm sure what you said was spectacular.
It was brilliant. Yeah, everybody write it down.
Yeah, I just don't have a good answer to this because I agree with you, Jim. I think that there's just so many ancient and medieval philosophers that can solve a lot of problems that we have today.
Yeah,
right?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, of course. Right.
That so many of the modern problems really are pseudo problems. That if they don't have a direct answer, at least the seeds to a good answer can be found by going back to perennial philosophy. Right. Mm-hmm.
Right. But also, another thing too is, I don't want to be too much of a knocker of modernity, right? I mean, like, Plato would not have been a huge fan of, like a a democratic republic like ours, right? Okay. You know what I mean? Nor would Aristotle, right? I mean, nor would Aquinas have been, right? And things like that. I mean, so
right in the public, before they start talking about communal property, Plato is harping on the highest form of government being, of course, an aristocracy. Or a monarchy, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, right. And so I think if you bring back an ancient philosopher and make him be impactful, be careful what you would wish for.
Right. Yeah, right. It could be a very different state of affairs. Meow's got an interesting question. We'll take like one or two more here, guys. Good stuff, but it is a Friday after all.
Right.
Meow says, Pat, you've mentioned NDE research before, but in my opinion, there's a stronger case for mediumship and a somewhat weaker case for reincarnation. Are these latter two explicable in terms of living agent psi? So let me say I have not looked into the research on mediumship. I know a friend of the show, Jimmy Aiken, has, and he's got a number of episodes where he goes through his research on that, and he might agree with you. I will say I agree that the research on NDEs versus reincarnation is heavily favorable towards NDEs, and I would say against reincarnation. My perspective when I did my whole deep dive into this was that I think you can give a number of look, there are some reincarnation cases that I think sort of strain a naturalistic hypothesis, but I think there's far more that are susceptible to a naturalistic analysis at the end of the day. And I think the ones that strain a natural a story that a naturalist would want to give are explicable in ways that don't require reincarnation to be true. Let me just say that. And I actually had a story with Jimmy about this. There's NDE research, I think, is, I'm convinced by it, right? I think that this is a real phenomena. It's been probably about a year or so since I've seriously caught up with the research, but it changed my thinking on a lot of stuff, really looking into the serious, like peer-reviewed research on this and the deeper, and you got to look at how that research is analyzed and interpreted too, of course, right? So yeah, definitely stronger NDE than reincarnation, and I have not looked heavily into the research of mediumship, so I can't speak heavily on that.
Can I do some NDE stuff? Do you mind?
Let's rock.
Because I was actually thinking really hard about this during my run yesterday, right? So
nice.
And so,
did you have an OBE on your run yesterday?
Sure, yeah. Well, yeah. So okay. Just using the famous shoes on the roof example, which I think a lot of people have heard of, like some I think it was a kid had a near-death experience that involved the sense of out of body and claimed that there was a pair of, just say for sake of argument, yellow sneakers on the roof, right? Okay. And it turned out there were some yellow sneakers on the roof. And there's really no way of explaining how this kid could have known that ahead of, well, there are ways, but it's they're all really low probability.
Right. So real quick, just for the listeners, just to summarize what's found in a lot of this research, or cases like Jim's describing, where somebody is clinically dead, flat EEG, fixed dilated pupils. And so it's surprising that they have any sort of experience at all, right? That's surprising.
Yeah.
Maybe not impossible, but surprising. But what is really fascinating is when they report veridical sensorial knowledge, right? Facts of the matter that are independently verified by researchers, right, and investigators. So Jim's just giving it. There's maybe some of the details are off, but that's actually a pretty famous case where this somebody dies and finds a shoe.
But
right?
For like dispositional NDE haters like me, that's the tough case. Like those kinds of veridical report cases, right? So those are always the ones to worry about, right? Mm-hmm. Now let me say this. Like one, I think. Like the idea that that they're flatlined on the EKG and stuff like that, that's less interesting to me because that's a question of how good our instrumentation is, and there's questions of like when the experience happened as opposed to when the person remembered it happening. It could be the experience happened while there was low grade brain activity going on. It's just that they remember it at the time. Okay.
Yeah. So there's always like empirical wiggle room on some of these things, right? Mm-hmm.
Okay. So, but here's the deal: is I have no problem saying different alterations of brain chemistry allow me to see things that are actually there. Okay. You see my point? And so I think there's a both and in between the positions that we're staking here. Mm-hmm. Okay. So for instance, like I am perfectly open that like psychedelic drugs may be putting people in contact with realities. I don't know it, but I'm perfectly open to that, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because it's alterations in my brain chemistry that make available to me like the presence of this coffee mug too, right? And so I don't see why it wouldn't be that if your brain were altered in different ways, you would have access to different.
This fits well with Sokolowski's theory of lensing.
Yeah,
of,
totally.
Of nervous system lensing, right? Mm-hmm.
Exactly. Okay. And so I have no reason to doubt that there are neurochemical changes as one approaches death that would give someone access to realities that are actually there. Okay. Do you see what I mean? But it's still playing out neurochemically. Okay. So I think this is, and this is my jam on everything in philosophy of mind. There's a false dichotomy here. It's like, well, there's no brain chemistry going on, ergo this must be supernatural. Or if it is supernatural, there must be no brain chemistry going on. It's like the inference in both directions. And I'm like, I don't know. I think there's probably brain chemistry going on, and I think it's supernatural.
So, I think maybe not brain chemistry, but also maybe still be physical.
Yeah,
and that's Spitzer's view. Actually, he thinks that there's just a different physical story. It wouldn't be one that naturalists of the broad variety are going to want to accept, right? But there's I think Spitzer leans in a trialist interactionist model of the mind anyways. So that's what's kind of fun about these debates and considerations, like how your philosophy of mind will of course bear in significantly on this. And then it's a matter of, okay, now we have some data that I need to accommodate in some sense, right? And what are my independent motivations for my philosophy of mind? How strong are those in relation to this other data? I guess for me, because I don't have a completely settled view of like, I'm not like a completely settled trialist interactionist or anything like that. Like a lot of these are actually open questions for me. Like I'm definitely not a physicalist, right? Right. But I don't have
completely settled anything, to tell you honestly.
I have way more questions than I have answers on most things. Don't get me wrong. And I hope I haven't ever created the opposite impression there. So for me, I'm just convinced by the empirical evidence that there's something going on here that does serious damage to naturalism, to physicalism, and gives serious hope for life after death at the end of the day, right? And the consistency of experience and like good hope, right? Like in a number of these experiences, and some of them veridical, like people meet their miscarried baby and people who grew up with serious deformities or illnesses seem to be cured, right? And helping them. So like the stories. Now, are all these veridical? I'm not claiming they are, but a lot of them, such veridical cases, give incredible hope. Incredible hope. And if there's good evidence for this, like, this is actually good news in a lot of ways, right?
And so, and my thing is, it's one more case where like this kind of false dichotomy that I've like made it my mission in life to like is it. In order for those to be veridical, doesn't mean they have to be unhinged from brain chemistry, right? Do you know what I mean? In order for them to be hinged to brain chemistry, doesn't mean they have to be delusional either. You know what I mean? Right? I think the issue, the way people go about this, and me included earlier in my thought, right, go to debunk these is, well, no, there's probably some underlying brain stuff going on here that we can't detect. Well, so what? Okay, it doesn't mean, like, you still have a seemingly veridical experience of something that this person has no direct physical access to. Okay, that even if it's grounded in deep nervous system stuff, which I think it probably is, it's still significant that someone's having a vertical experience that outstrips anything we can make sense of how they would have access to that.
Right.
Do you see my point? Right.
I do.
Yeah, exactly. You know what I mean? And stuff like the uniformity of them, right? I mean, like like people kind of having the same kind of quote unquote hallucinations cross cultures like that. That's significant. Like, and I'll say a similar thing about like the whole DMT elf thing, right? The fact that you've got people all over the world taking the same trip, right? With this all that tells me that maybe there's something interesting going on here, right? Same thing with the NDEs, but that doesn't mean it's not grounded in brain chemistry. For me, I would say, of course it is, but that just because it's going on in your head, Harry, doesn't mean it's not real. Right?
Yeah, and I'm open to it either way of whether it's connected with brain chemistry or not. But what I will say is that there's a lot of people out there who sort of dismiss NDEs. And to do that just tells me you're supremely ignorant on the literature on this, right? It is impressive. It is impressive, right? And it's brought and convinced a lot of, again, relevant experts. One of the major guys who I think started the studies of NDEs, Raymond Moody, was really sort of an agnostic sort of psychologist. And now he says, no, I'm completely convinced. I don't know if he has any particular religious commitments, but he's completely convinced that this life isn't all there is. We do go on to something after that. So, yeah.
So I guess here's why I'm on it now, and I think I'm going to write something on it, right, is to say, look, I don't think it argues for dualism, all right? Because I think there's perfectly good interpretations of what's going on there that don't require.
Real quick, when you say dualism, do you include hylomorphism or do you not? Because some people, right? Because some people obviously do include the hylomorphic views form. So when you say dualism, you are not including hylomorphism. And
I think the people who do that are wrong about what hylomorphism is. Okay. And so,
because some people call it hylomorphic dualism, right?
You want to drive me crazy, do that. Yeah.
That's how they trigger Jim. Yeah.
Yeah. You want to get me triggered, right? But anyway, so I don't think it shows dualism. I don't think it shows that minds operate independently of bodies or something like that. I think it shows, given the content of some of these experiences, that indeed there is a kind of experience that we can have, embodied or otherwise, that goes far beyond anything in our our ability to scientifically account for it, right?
Or maybe we have to just expand our understanding of what it means to be embodied, right?
Yeah,
because as we know, so much of the mind-body problem isn't just on the side of the mind, but what is a body? Right? Well, that's Chomsky's point, right?
And this is something that like really hit me this summer when I was on my big Merleau-Ponty jag, right? And for Merleau-Ponty, when he says that like cognition is always embodied, or human thought is always embodied, what he means is it always is part of a prior history. Like for him, embodiment is to be historical, right? And to say that somehow I'm going to have an experience of something that is independent of my prior history as an emotional being, as an evolved being, as a being in a certain culture and all that stuff is to treat us as if we were like a disembodied machine of some sort. It has nothing to do with whether or not you're meat, right? It has to do with whether or not your experience is always framed in a history, right? You know what I mean? And very much so, the experience of someone having a near-death experience is embodied in that sense, which for me is the important sense.
Yeah, excellent. You know what? We should just do a whole episode on NDEs at some point. We can just review some of the research and cases, and then we can just like jam on it after that. That would be
in some ways you've moved me on, right? I think I was kind of like a snotty NDE.
Most Thomistic corruptionists are, right? I remember I had a chat with Tomaszewski maybe a year and a half ago, and he didn't want to go in that territory at all.
Yeah. But also though, I think, what I probably want to push on him about there is this assumption though, that like what it is to have like that having an embodied experience entails, right? Something that is like limited to biology and not this broader sense of embodiment that we're talking about.
Yeah. Sweet. All right. Let's do one or two more quick ones, and then we'll sign off here. DeWong says, when dealing with modal collapse, I heard you and Gavin respond by appealing to Cambridge change and the action being in the effect. Can you explain the second part more? Jim, I think we're actually going to do another roundtable with Gavin on this very topic coming up. So DeWong, stay tuned to that. Let me just say a few quick things. So if you take a sort of Anscomian view, and certainly in Aquinas's metaphysics, right? And he's sort of following Aristotle here, right? The action of the agent is in the patient, right? So when an agent acts, let's just say the action isn't in the agent. And with God's action for contingent things is granting them existence, right? So that the action is God's granting existence, and that action isn't located in God. It's located in the creatures, right? So with the commitments that God's action is basic and immediate, and that the action of the agent is in the patient, what this helps with modal collapse is you can just push all contingency extrinsic to God, all passive potency extrinsic to God. And that's gonna solve, I think, a host of issues that we see in a lot of just, I think, confused contemporary debates in philosophy of religion and philosophy of God. That, again, this is another thing where there's like modern problems that like have very ancient solutions, right? If you're willing to just go back and do the metaphysics. And so Gavin has a paper coming out specifically on this, and me and him, Jim and I were just chatting about setting up a roundtable so we can go more in depth. So that'll be coming up soon. But I don't know if you had any just preamble thoughts here, Jim.
I don't. I'm looking forward to having that conversation, though. Yeah.
Cool. Yeah. So stay tuned for that. That might be happening next week, actually. So
we'll get it worked out.
All right, let's finish with the fitness one here. Marco says, if somebody's focus is primarily hypertrophy, but you see many gaps in their current training, how do you explain to them that filling the gaps is more important than doing curls and tricep extensions? So sort of a coaching question here. It's a good one, though.
Yeah, that's a good question, right?
Can I just do a quick thing, right? So if somebody's goal is to put on muscle, one thing I like to tell them is that you don't want to be driving with the e-brake on, right? Yeah. So if you want to put on muscle, like what's going to help you do that is moving well and being stronger, right? So if you have gaps, if you're just a weak man, just run the quick thought experiment. Like, who's going to be able to put on more muscle? The guy who can work with 65 pounds on a barbell, or the guy who can work with 225 pounds on a barbell, right? And 225 still isn't that impressive, but to ask the question is to answer it, right? So like if somebody's just focused on doing what they think are bodybuilding exercises, but they're obscenely weak, you need to make that point, right? And say like, no, what we need to do is we need to fill gaps and we need to make you stronger, because we think of like strength and performance is like the bucket, right? You increase it by getting stronger doesn't necessarily mean you're going to get bigger. You will gain muscle no matter what if you get stronger, but you at least increase your potential to get bigger.
Yep.
Right. To then, if you then do like a dedicated hypertrophy program, the stronger you are, the more potential you have to put that sort of muscle on. So I would just make that general point first.
What was that? There's that old bodybuilding manual, The Keys to Progress, that like Iron Mind publishes by, is it John McCallum or something like that?
I do not know that one.
It's this old school bodybuilding manual that was like huge in the 60s, right? And those guys got huge. It was mostly pre-steroids, right? They got cut. And what does he have you do in that thing? You're going to like bench press, you're going to squat, you're going to deadlift, you're going to do pull-ups, and you're going to go for jogs, right? I mean, that's what he has them doing. And I'll guarantee you those were like very healthy men, right? Mm-hmm. They looked good. You wouldn't want to fight them, right? Do you know what I mean? It just seems to me like just by good fundamental general physical preparedness kind of training, right? Form will follow function on all that, right?
Yeah.
Right.
Good.
And none of them had done a tricep push down in their life, right?
Yeah. Just do weighted dips. It's just going to be a lot better for everybody.
Yeah.
For everybody. Good stuff, man. We covered a lot of territory today. Before we go, mention
this classic Pat and Jim, man. There was no plan.
No plan.
What are you doing? I don't know. What are you doing? Let's go.
Let's do it. Yeah. Mention your website and stuff again and what's coming up before we go.
jdmadden.com. Your one-stop place for all your philosophy and fitness needs, right? I'll be linking the preprint to paper. Just had come out yesterday on there today, I guess. I'll probably get to that.
The evolutionary pains one, right?
Yep. It's on epiphenomenalism and the evolution of pain and why that is good news for the theist.
Indeed. Good news indeed.
Good news.
Right.
Yep.
Yeah, we'll do I want to explore that more in an episode. I know we sort of teased it out already previously, but I'd like to go deeper in that. So stay tuned for that, gentle listeners. Please do like, share, and subscribe. Thanks for the great questions.
Great questions.
You certainly keep us on our toes here at the Pat Flynn Show.
Yeah. If
you want to check out the Substack, I put the link in the comments, but it's just Chronicles of Strength, I think .substack or substack.chronicles of strength, one of those two. And we will be joining you again shortly. Cheers.
You bet.